The custom mechanical keyboard hobby has always been seen as an expensive one, but that is not exactly the whole truth. This is especially the case in recent times, where we are seeing a lot more affordable products that are really good. For example, these Akko CS V2 switches are very good for the money. There are 3 switches in this series, the Radiant Red and Vintage White linear switches, as well as the Lavender Purple tactile switch. Without further ado, let's get to the review of these Akko CS V2 switches. What makes these switches particularly interesting, aside from the fact that they're very affordable, is the extended springs that are found in all 3 switches. The Radiant Red is a 62-gram linear switch with an 80mm spring, while the Vintage White is also a linear switch, but it has a lighter 45-gram spring with an even longer 22mm length. The Lavender Purple tactile switch, on the other hand, has a 50-gram 80mm spring. The material for these 3 switches are the same. They have a polycarbonate top housing, a palm stem, and a nylon bottom. These are also 3-pin switches, making them a plate-mounted switch. It's also worth noting that these are not factory loop switches, so they are a little bit scratchy out of the box. We will get back to this in a moment. In terms of pricing, here in Malaysia, these switches are actually available on Shopee Malaysia itself through Akko Gear's official Shopee store. For a box of 45 switches, the Radiant Red and Lavender Purple cost only 38 ringgit. The Vintage White for some reason cost 39 ringgit and 56 cents. So that's a little bit odd, but still, you are paying less than 1 ringgit per switch. That is really affordable. Okay, now let's get to the good stuff. First up, the packaging of these switches are very nice. They come in a nice box showing the specs of the switches at the back and a tray holding the switches on the inside. This is quite a nice touch, as switches usually just come loose in a simple plastic bag. Out of the 3 switches in the Akko CS series, our favorite is the Radiant Red. It feels smooth out of the box with just a hint of scratchiness. Obviously, it is not quite as smooth as a more expensive JWK switch, but we would say it's around the level of a Gateron switch, which is more than smooth enough if we're being honest here. As for its sound profile, it is on the clackier side. It has a pleasant poppy sound signature with a slightly deep bottom out from the nylon bottom housing. The 80mm slow spring also requires a bit more force to push down the key at the very top, so it does feel a little bit heavier than what the 62-gram spring might indicate. But if you're coming from a different linear switch, you will feel right at home with the Radiant Red because it has a familiar typing experience. If you want something a little bit more unique, there's the Vintage White for you to consider. As a whole, the Vintage White is quite similar to the Radiant Red, but the difference here is its extra long 22mm spring. The even longer spring makes the 45-gram weight of the Vintage White feel more comfortable to use, and that it won't actuate at the gentlest of touch. Aside from that, it has a snappier return as well thanks to the extra length of the spring. It also sounds quite similar to the Radiant Red, but the Vintage White is a little bit more higher pitch. Last but certainly not least is the Lavender Purple tactile switch. Compared to the other 2 linear switches, the Lavender Purple is noticeably higher pitch and clackier than the other 2. The tactile bump of the Lavender Purple, on the other hand, is more rounded with a medium tactility. It's definitely not as tactile as a Glorious Panda or the popular Gazoo Boba U40, but it is certainly much more tactile than, say, a brown switch, such as the Gateron Phantom Brown found in the Keychron Q1. Other than that, the 80mm long spring should give the switch a more snappy nature, but we found that the outstroke tends to be a little bit sluggish, oddly enough. This is especially noticeable on the longer mod keys, such as the spacebar, where it actually got stuck a few times for us. And that brings us to what's not so great about these 3 Akko CS switches. The fact is, they are clacky switches, so it is not for those who want a more deep, talky switch in comparison. Because these switches are not factory loop, there is noticeable spring ping on all of them, with some switches being noticeably worse than the others. Granted, some lube will solve this issue and they will make these switches even smoother as well. So, are the Akko CS V2 switches worth it? If you're looking for a smooth and clacky linear switch on a budget, the Radiant Raid and Vintage Ride are definitely worth considering. The very light 45g bottom-up force of the Vintage Ride is a little too light for our liking, but if that's exactly what you want, then hey, it's a great budget linear switch. As for the Lavender Purple tactile switch, it is the clackiest and loudest switch of the bunch, and for that reason, it is not our favorite switch. Then again, it is still a good option if you've been meaning to try a tactile switch, but you don't have the budget for pricier options like the aforementioned Boba U40. At the end of the day, these are still very affordable switches, and with that in mind, the Akko CS V2 switches are great for folks who are still exploring their options to find out what exactly they want out of their mechanical keyboard switch. As usual, we will leave you guys with a sound test of these three switches. They are mounted on the Keychron Q1 with all of the gaskets installed, along with some foam in the bottom case to make it not sound so hollow. We are also using Akko's very own black and pink double shot PBT keycap set for this sound test. If you like this review of the Akko CS V2 switches, leave us a like, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and of course stay tuned for more good stuff to come here on this channel and nextshift.com.